Okay, so now we want to report on the progress and the work ahead on the other plank of the Oregon Business Plan, a set of initiatives to improve the delivery of our public services. Oregon has made enormous progress on our top initiatives over the past year, creating momentum for the year ahead. We're going to hear three presentations this morning. We're going to hear about long-term outcome-based budgeting, about education, and about health care. So let's get started. I would like to introduce now to you Jim Piro, President and Chief Executive Officer of Portland General Electric. Around our office, we call them Brand X. Jim will report on our progress to create a long-term outcomes-based budget to guide the provision of public services. He chairs the committee advising Governor Kitzhaber and Michael Jordan, Oregon's Chief Operating Officer, as they craft a new budget system for Oregon. So please welcome my friend and my colleague, Jim Piro. Jim?
Thank you. Thank you, Brand Y. During 2011, Governor Kitzhaber, along with the legislature, initiated the development of an outcome-based budget process that will be framed in a 10-year planning horizon versus the historic 2-year plan. Michael Jordan, the Chief Operating Officer of the state, and I are leading the executive committee comprised of business leaders and government leaders to guide this effort. And I also want to thank George McNaughton and Sarah Miller from the state for their excellent work with the committee. To help us understand the amount of resources available, the committee is working on a 10-year forecast to understand both revenues and expenses, including significant unfunded liabilities like PERS, financial reserve policy, and key risk factors that will affect both revenues and expenses. Our goal is to put in place a process that gets the best overall outcomes in both the short term and the long term for the money spent. You will hear more about this tomorrow when Michael Jordan does a presentation tomorrow morning on this topic, and I would urge you to attend. To set the stage for this discussion, I have a few slides that will illustrate the challenges facing Oregonians. The following slides were developed by John Tapania of Eco Northwest and are consistent with data produced by the state. These slides show the general fund expenditures as a percentage of total fund revenues. Assuming no significant change or improvement in medical outcomes, especially in Medicaid, the percentage of our state budget dollars going to health and human services will rise from 30% of the general fund to over 50% of the general fund by 2040. If this indeed happens, and again assuming no increases in tax rates, then education funding would drop from the current 50% level of the general fund to 30% of the general fund. To give you an example of what that means in today's dollars, today's current budget is about $7.45 million for education. A 20% reduction would equate to about a $3 billion reduction in spending on education. This is a direction that will impact the competitiveness of Oregonians and will have a direct implication on public safety. This slide illustrates another long-term trend the state is forecasting to face. The bottom line is with more baby boomers retiring and living longer, which I think is a good thing, the number of workers in Oregon divided by the number of Oregonians over 64 will decline from a ratio of about 4 to 2.5. This has a number of very important implications for the state. The biggest is less revenues from the non-working elderly and higher service costs that will be borne by the state to serve that elderly population. We also asked Eco Northwest to assume that the economy grew faster, that we saw more increases in jobs, and therefore more growth in personal income. Total personal income growth grew from 4.7% to 5.2% over the long term. This improves the situation, but there's not sufficient dollars still available for education. So this defines at a very high level the challenges our state is facing in the foreseeable future, and really makes the case for change that has driven the governor to initiate the state's effort to get better outcomes in all areas of state and local government through a new budget process. These are the old questions the state would ask to try to balance a 2-year budget, with little or no regard to the impacts on outcomes in the next 10 years. The current way is all about allocating limited dollars without regard to outcomes or measurable results. We missed a slide here. Can you go back a slide? Yeah. These are the new questions we need to be asking. They focus on achieving better short and long-term outcomes through both strategic spending and strategic investment. Part of an outcome-based budget is to have clear performance metrics to measure outcomes and ensure we are on the right path to get better overall results for Oregonians. This is our goal for all areas of government, to get the best long-term value with the revenues we have available. Better outcomes plus better economy can yield this result. Hopefully this has provided you a brief glimpse and understanding of the challenges ahead, and that it will pique your interest in learning more about outcome-based budgeting. We will talk about that more in the next couple panels. I want to thank and applaud the governor for this bold step to change how we do budgeting in the state. Much has to happen before he presents his 2013-2015 budget to the legislature, and I'm hopeful the legislature will work with him to implement this new approach. I can assure you that the business community is there to support him, and it's a very important initiative that we're supporting. Now I'd like to turn it back over to Pat, who will introduce the 2 panels to cover both education and health and human services. Thank you.
Well done. Thank you, Jim. That is obviously a very, very substantial undertaking, so really we all really appreciate your personal efforts to lead us on that. And speaking of serious undertakings, we all know that education is key to the future of Oregon. This past year, we've made enormous headway on this front. Julia Brim-Edwards, Manager of Government Affairs from Nike, is here to give you a brief report on our accomplishments. Julia is chair of the Oregon Business Association and was recently confirmed as a member of the Oregon Education Investment Board. Then we'll hear from 3 superb educators who participated last August with a larger team of education leaders to envision a new education delivery model to guide our work going forward. Sonya Christian is the Vice President of Academic and Student Affairs at Lane Community College. Sarah Denney teaches English at Hillsborough High School. Greg Hamann is the President of Lynn Benton Community College. To introduce this panel further and to start with a few remarks, I'd love for Julia to come up. Julia?
Good morning. I was giving Pat a hard time a moment ago because in his bag of tricks he didn't have one of those shoes to pull out, which certainly is a key cornerstone of a cluster here in the Pacific Northwest. Well, along with the jobs agenda, the business plan identifies education as a top priority. We want a strong and healthy economy, and to do that we need great schools and universities. Talented, creative people drive our economy. And great schools are critical to produce, attract, and retain a talented and productive workforce and citizenry. There's a very strong connection between education and incomes. If you look at the slides, the correlation between education attainment and income levels striking, very compelling. Equally compelling is the correlation between unemployment and educational attainment. Again, the higher level of educational attainment, the higher level of employment. If we want to grow jobs and increase our incomes, we must invest in and improve public education. Last year, as most of you know, the business plan proposed an aggressive education agenda. Well, the legislature and the governor exceeded our expectations. Look at the list of accomplishments that we came out of the 2011 session with. First off, setting the goal. The legislature formally adopted the goal long advocated by the business community, the so-called 40-40-20 goal. That goal says by the year 2025, 40% of adult Oregonians will have at least a 4-year degree, that another 40% have an associate degree or some professional technical certificate that leads to a good job, and that the remaining 20% earn a high-quality high school diploma. Second, the legislature created Senate Bill 909 to create the Oregon Education Investment Board with the directive that the board create a plan to achieve the 40-40-20 goal and to recommend how we can align and coordinate our education system all the way from preschool through the university system to break down the current silos that exist between the early learning programs, the K-12 school system, community colleges, and the university system. And they also ask us to recommend how to better position the system to invest tax dollars to target our resources on better student outcomes rather than seat time. And on the higher education front, the legislature gave Oregon universities greater flexibility by removing the system from state agency status. This is the first step towards greater autonomy and flexibility. I saw Senator Mark Hass, who's the chair of the Senate Education Committee, earlier today, and he and his colleagues on that committee and in the legislature really deserve a lot of credit for moving that through the legislature and really putting the university system on a path to greater flexibility and autonomy. The legislature also complemented these bills with other initiatives to advance professional standards and professional development of teachers, to invest and support innovation in the classroom, and to require the state school superintendent be an education professional. We particularly want to thank Oregon Governor John Kitzhaber, Senate President Peter Courtney, House Speakers Arnie Roblin and Bruce Hanna for their bold leadership, and we thank the many legislators from both sides of the aisle who worked together to make this happen. The business community owes our elected leaders a debt of gratitude for moving the ball down the field on education, kind of like Darren Thomas has been doing all fall for the Ducks. Okay, I'm from Nike. I've got to get a little shout out to the Ducks. I went to OSU, though, so it's a bipartisan. I also want to acknowledge the tremendous contributions of the business associations, OBC, AOI, PBA, OBA, and the chambers around the state for helping set this direction and really providing sustained support for this work. We've accomplished a lot, and we still have much to do. I'm honored to serve on the Oregon Education Investment Board, the 13-person board chaired by the governor. The business community brings a strong team to that board. Joining me from the business community on the board would be Ron Saxton, Matt Donegan, who also serves on the State Higher Ed Board, so this is his lower profile board, and Dick Alexander. We're only a month old, but the board is already hard at work. We've launched a recruitment for a talented leader to serve as the state's chief education officer. We've recommended the following for the 2012 legislature to consider: the creation of achievement compacts between the board and school districts, community colleges, and universities to gain their commitments to levels of achievement for their students starting next school year. We've proposed to give the soon-to-be-hired chief education officer authority to design and lead this new aligned and coordinated education system. And we've proposed to reorganize the delivery of early learning to better prepare kids for kindergarten, reduce duplication and gaps in the system, and require greater accountability for results. We've also committed to working closely with legislative leaders to recommend consolidation and/or elimination of overlapping and duplicative boards, commissions, and administrative positions. This is just the beginning of a journey and the start of a potential game-changing transformation, and it's one the business community is going to need to stay engaged in. To help chart the course for Oregon's future, last summer, the business community invited 30 Oregonians with a focus on educators to spend 1 month together in one room to develop ideas for consideration by the investment board and other policymakers on what it will take to achieve this really ambitious 40-40-20 goal. We asked them to be bold and imaginative, and they didn't let us down. I've been inspired by their work. I think you will be too. Today we have invited 3 participants from this project, which we call LearnWorks, to give you a glimpse of their vision. Let's hear from these 3 committed Oregon educators.
Hello, I'm Sonya Christian, Vice President from Lane Community College. And August 2011, for 30 of the LearnWorks participants, were the most grueling, exciting, consuming days, time spent reading, writing, thinking, Learning, Unlearning, and Relearning, 30 days with 30 spirited educators and business folks who are opinionated, passionate, but with one thing in common, all with a deep commitment to Oregon citizens, Oregon health and wellness, and therefore committed to the Oregon Governor's 40-40-20 vision. To realize this vision, we cannot be complacent about the compartmentalized educational maze. It is not acceptable for students to have to repeat a subject merely because courses aren't aligned or transferable. It is not acceptable for students to have the freedom to fail. We must build a culture where they have a right to succeed. It is not acceptable to slow students down, to make the pace of their education match the pace of our scheduled delivery. We must meet students where they are, whether this means supporting accelerated excellence or structured interventions. We must successfully communicate to students that mediocrity is not acceptable. It is our responsibility to offer choices that, when taken, appears to the Oregon learner that a seamless path was created by design, because in fact it was. Paths that lead from high school to the workplace, to the community college, university, paths that build on what was learned in the military leading to college with no wasted time. To be able to do this, we cannot work in isolation. Even isolated excellence will doom us in failure. To implement this vision, we have to sit together at the same table: high schools, business and industry partners, community colleges, and universities. We have to commit to new ways of delivering and assessing education because traditional approaches do not scale to meet demand. To achieve this educational continuum that is clear and transparent to all Oregonians, we must focus on two things: identifying competencies and learning outcomes as the child progresses from PK through elementary, middle, high school, college, and workforce, and two, developing a common data sharing system that allows us to track cohorts of students as they progress in their intellectual development along the educational continuum. Sarah will speak more about the data system, so let me focus on the competencies and learning outcomes. We've got to define the learning outcomes, assess them, and actually document the learning. We must focus on content skills. Math, numeracy, literacy, a sense of numbers, is fundamental. But what is even more important to the 21st century learner is to develop skills to learn how to think and to learn how to learn. With the explosion of information easily accessible, the thinking muscles of learners must be keenly developed regardless of the subject or discipline. And when we discuss academic achievement for all Oregonians, we must consider those whose parents have not gone to college or those from disenfranchised populations who may not have the academic behaviors that are necessary to be successful in a rigorous academic environment that is preparing students for global engagement and having to face contexts that have not even been defined today. The good news is we are well on our way in Oregon with the Common Core state standards, with Dave Conley's 4 dimensions to college and career readiness, which we defined in LearnWorks as think, know, act, go, and the degree qualifications profile with clearly defined reference points for higher education. Assessment is not a trivial matter. Consider transition issues. Exiting out of high school, that assessment should not be different from entry into college. It needs to be one and the same point. Students completing high school requirements must be college and career ready. We must have electronic portfolios for each of our learners that documents their own learning, what they know and can do. In a world of Web 2.0 and blogging and personal learning environments, this should not be too onerous. Education systems in the United States have long used the Carnegie Unit as a means of tracking and quantifying student learning. This method of measuring attainment via time directly stems from a long history where a scholar transfers his wisdom to awaiting students. The idea being the more time spent in the presence of a scholar, the more wisdom a student attains. Now, education needs a transactional currency, so let's keep the Carnegie credit, but let's link it directly to more tangible outcomes regardless of the time spent in the classroom. Let's take this further and recognize that learning has occurred in other settings beyond the classroom and find a way to translate it back to the currency we use in education. Let's face it, the transcript of the 21st century is dated and woefully lacking in the information it contains about the learner. Using technology, we can now construct transcripts with nested and dynamically linked data that creates an informed picture of what the learner knows and can do. We have created a transformative vision for education in Oregon. We know that people are attracted to transformational ideas and stories like the Lumina Foundation, Hewlett, the Department of Education, National Science Foundation, and in fact, they've been watching Oregon, and we've been getting a series of grants, $500,000 here, $1 million there, but now it's time to move to the next step. Why not invite them to Oregon? Why not tell them this compelling vision with the concrete steps? And then ask them collectively to fund this vision in its entirety. I think they will say yes.
Thanks. Good morning. My name's Sarah Denney, and I teach at Hillsborough High School in Hillsborough, Oregon. I was a member of LearnWorks, and the reason that I was invited to join LearnWorks is because I run a proficiency-based teaching and learning classroom. I'm one of a handful of teachers in the state of Oregon that's continually growing as we move forward, who has this kind of a classroom. And in my work as an instructional coach at Hill High, I'm also able to coach people around proficiency-based teaching and learning. This process was a lens through which we looked at all of the outcomes for the LearnWorks and for the 40-40-20 when we were put to the test. We thought about proficiency-based teaching and learning because it's logical, it's ethical, and it's something as a teacher I can justify every day when I work with my students and with my parents, with my principal, and with my community. But most of you don't know what it is, so I'm going to tell you what it is. If I can have a show of hands of how many of y'all have children. Yeah? All right, good. I'm on the right track now. I do too. I have a kindergartner and an 18-month-old. And I teach freshmen, so you should feel really sorry for me. You can buy me a drink sometime if you see me out on the street. As parents, we want to know more, right? We want to know more. And if you think about your child's history and education, you think about all the information you didn't have. And this is where proficiency-based teaching and learning comes into play. What you want to know more of is what your kid's supposed to be learning. You want to know what targets he or she is supposed to be meeting in his or her class and whether or not those targets align with what other kids are doing in the classroom across the hall or the classroom across the district or the classrooms across the state or, God forbid, if we get really crazy, around the nation, right? We want to know more about that. We want to know that the assessments offered in our students' classrooms actually meet the targets, that those assessments are authentic and they're fair. Oftentimes, we don't know how the student got to the grade that he or she got. We don't know the process used. And as teachers, we want to be able to base our assessments on standards. And as parents, you want to know what the assessment was based on so that you can help your children. As parents, that's what we want to do more than anything. Of course, I work with teenagers, and they don't want anything to do with you. But you at least could start the conversation. Also, with proficiency-based teaching and learning, and the parent relationship there, you want to know that your teacher is highly qualified, not just in the content, but in instruction, which requires at this point in Oregon professional development around using standards to design assessments and collaborate with colleagues in professional learning communities. We also want to know, as parents, what a grade means. What does a C in Writing 121 really indicate about one's learning process? Does it mean that your child actually met all the standards for the class, but just barely? Does it mean that he or she maybe met 8 out of 10 of the standards? What does it mean? We don't know, because after 18 weeks of learning, you get 1 letter back. That's all you get. You get 1 letter on a report card, and that's all I get to enter on a report card. I know your kids in and out when I have them in my class. I know what they're capable of doing. I know how well they can use their noggins and how well they can't. But all I get to report on the grade report is a letter. That's all I get. That's all you get. And that's just not right. As Sonya indicated, we're in the information age, right? We should be able to get information, especially about our children. It's ridiculous that we don't. The last piece I want to talk about with proficiency-based teaching and learning is that we have to use that data that we collect, and we have to be able to use it to offer flexible time for our students and for our teachers. We have to be able to give kids longer if they need it, or shorter periods. If you have a student that's already exceeding all standards, move them on, right? Give them something else to be learning, something else to be working towards, so that they can move on to take classes at the community college level or the university level if they can. Why hold on to them, right? Let them go. Give kids the opportunity to learn at their own pace, and that's what proficiency-based teaching and learning has the potential to do if done correctly. In order to do this correctly, we have to have a database system. We have to have a data system that is statewide. We have to have a data system that tracks our students pre-K through post-secondary. We have the ability to collect this data with good assessments in the classroom. With standards-based teaching and learning, we can do this. But right now, I have nowhere to put the information that I have. It's stored on little pieces of paper and random grade programs. I still have to add up my grades by hand because I don't have a grade program that actually allows me to enter standards and how they're measured in the classroom and have that translate to 1 grade for 6 different standards. There isn't anything in place right now for that, and we need that. We need it to go from pre-K all the way through post-secondary, and we need it to be useful. We need it to be useful for me as a classroom teacher, for me as a parent, for the community, and for the policymakers. We need to make sure that data being collected is actual data that reflects your children's learning, that reflects what he or she can do, what he or she intended to do, and what he or she will do in the future. It's necessary along with professional development and with some guts, right, from the people in this room to actually take up this cause and do what's right for our kids. I can say that I've been doing a proficiency-based program in my classroom for 3 years now, and I won't ever go back to what I was doing before. Regardless of what's decided in this state, regardless of what's decided in this room right now, I'm not going to go back to what I was doing. It wasn't right. I couldn't justify what I was doing before. Now I can. I know what I'm doing every day. I know where my kids are. I know where they're going. It's just time for everyone else to get on board. Thank you.
Well, you've heard Sonya and Sarah tell us some things about how the design and delivery of education needs to change in the state of Oregon, and the ways in which we need to move things from the left to the right, the ways in which we need to shift education from time-based to a process that focuses on the student, focuses on a broader understanding of learning, and gives us the tools to do that. But we have a problem. We're paid to do the things in the left column. Let me give you a story. A while ago, I thought about buying a car. And I'm a little particular, so I won't buy one off the lot. I decided that I needed to order something using that checklist to say what I needed. So I went there, and I was happy. He says, okay, come back. We'll give you a call when it's ready. So I wait, and I get a call. And they said, your car's ready. Come down and get it. So I come down to the auto dealer, and I'm so excited. You can't believe it. I get there. I open the door, and there are no seats in the car. And then I look around and I notice that the bumpers are missing. And I look to my dealer and I say, now I don't understand this. You told me the car was done. I come down here to get it, and it's not done. What is this? He says, well, you got to understand, you didn't actually buy a car. We have researchers that have figured out how long it takes to buy a car, and what you paid for was that amount of time. Well, your car was a little complicated, a little special, and we ran out of time. So this is what you get. Congratulations. I went, wow. I tell the story because that is one of the ways in which we fund education today. We focus on the amount of time, or we focus on the materials used to do education instead of the outcome. In order to move our practices, our design and our delivery of education from the from column to the to column, we need to change the way in which we fund education. Now, I'll be the first to tell you, education needs more money, but we can do better with the money we have, and we do it by changing to an outcomes-based model, by attaching our funding to the things we want to accomplish instead of the things that we use to get there. Now, I could look at my own institution, Lynn Benton, and say, well, how would that make it different for me? Well, at Lynn Benton, we are paid to teach credits of instruction. And we design credits of instruction, and we do a good job of that. We do a great job of doing credit instruction, and we teach a lot of credits. In fact, we teach 380 credits for every degree and certificate that we award. Now, that's interesting because our degrees and certificates require somewhere between 45 and 100 credits. Think about that. Now, I know we could do better, and we at Lynn Benton and at all of our community colleges are working to do a better job to increase completion rates. But if my payment is attached to those 380 credits, I'm not very motivated financially. In fact, I don't want to risk the funding that my institution needs desperately in order to do a better job of creating more graduates. So for us to make the kind of changes that Sarah and Sonya have talked about, we need to shift the funding away from the inputs and shift them to the outputs. What that looks like is what we call a tight, loose relationship between the state and the education delivery system. We have mutual roles that are essential to moving forward in education in the state of Oregon. The state needs to clearly define the outcomes, the objectives that we want to achieve as a state for our economy, for our people. We've stated it in 40-40-20, and we've done a lot of things to help us move toward the attainment of those goals. We need to attach funding to those outcomes, and we need to develop measures that help us to know whether or not we're attaining those outcomes. But on the other side, what we need to do is let teachers, the people in the classroom, people like Sarah who are face-to-face with the student, have the freedom to design that educational experience for the sake of that student, to be innovative in the classroom in the same way that Senator Wyden talks about allowing business to be innovative. We need to get out of the way of our teachers so that they can do the great work that they were trained to do and they love to do. That doesn't make us unaccountable. It makes us accountable for the outcome, not for the process. At LearnWorks, we had a group of people who worked together to develop what I believe is a solid foundation for changing the way in which we do education in Oregon. But we didn't just develop a foundation. In the process, we ended up with a group of people who have the conviction that we can actually do this and the resolve to do it. I'm here to welcome you and ask you to join us in that work. Thank you.
Wow, that was inspiring. Sarah, we have an 11-year-old, my wife and I. We may have to move into your school district. Thanks for that great presentation. And Julia, I also want to thank you for Nike's generous contribution to the LearnWorks initiative, as well as to the Meyer Memorial Trust and the Oregon Community Foundation, J.P. Morgan Chase, and Intel Corporation for their tremendous support. We'll hear more about the investment board in tomorrow's session.